Speak up.
Speak up in English.
Speak up.
Speak up
All over the world.
Speak up
Speak up.
in Britain and America. Speak up.
Speak up.
Speak up
In Africa.
and India.
Speak up.
In Ireland,
New Zealand and Australia.
Trinidad, Singapore, Hong Kong too.
Speak up in English wherever you are. And the whole world,
The whole world,
the whole world can speak up to you.
speak up,
Speak up.
speak up.
Speak up.
This cassette is number 1 of a series designed to enable you to understand all the varieties of spoken English. The first Speak Up cassette begins with an exclusive interview with the world-famous romantic novelist Barbara Cartland, followed by the World of English, the Grosskopf File, and Armchair Detective, where you are asked to solve a crime on each cassette. But now, here is Tom Boyd to introduce the Speak Up interview.
Barbara Cartland is described by her publisher as the world's most famous romantic novelist. But, as I found out, she is many other things as well. According to the Guinness Book of Records, she is the world's most prolific writer, still producing a new book nearly every 2 weeks, and holds the record as the world's top-selling author, having sold some 370 million copies of her books. As if this weren't enough, she also appears regularly on television, both in Britain and in the United States, where she is known as the Queen of Romance. And strip cartoons of her novels appear in 54 different American newspapers. She is an insatiable world traveler, and as president of the National Association for Health, endorses all kinds of natural foods and health products, and campaigns for a variety of social causes, such as the welfare of old people, nurses, and gypsies. She is the deputy president of the St. John Ambulance Brigade for her county of Hertfordshire. I went to see her at Camfield Place, her large, typically English country house, about an hour's drive from London. It was in this very house that Beatrix Potter spent her childhood, and later immortalized the garden as the setting for Peter Rabbit. When I arrived, Barbara Cartland had just returned from India and was on the phone planning a promotional tour of the United States in a few weeks' time. She had already written her daily quota of 6,700 words towards a new book, and had been on television that morning, and was preparing to give an interview for Australian radio that evening, but still had time to offer me a lavish and leisurely afternoon tea before we settled down to chat. One may well ask, what demons pursue an elderly lady to keep up a life that would exhaust another woman 1/3 her age? For Barbara Cartland is now 82 years old. Looking ageless and dressed as usual in pink, this remarkable woman began by telling me about some of her many interests.
Well, I do an awful lot with St. John Ambulance Brigade, which you know is a marvellous organisation. It all started with the Crusades, you see. The first St. John's started when some knights stayed behind after we evacuated to Jerusalem in 1100 and did first aid to the wounded, and that's how it started. And in England you may not have a football match, you may not have a race meeting unless our St. John Ambulance first aiders are there.
Princess Margaret is the grand president.
Yes,
I believe,
she's the
and
head
also-
of it.
And I think Princess Anne is also very involved in
Yes,
her
I
county.
saw the Princess Anne the other day, and I was meeting her with family planning, and so I said to her, I usually meet with the St. John, and she said, yes, I was with them yesterday.
It's all voluntary work.
All its members are unpaid. The only organisation in the whole world that made nothing out of the royal wedding.
As the step-grandmother of Lady Diana Spencer, as she was then, why didn't you go to the wedding?
It's a long story. It's always caused a great deal of controversy because everybody thought that St. Paul's Cathedral was much bigger than it was. And my son-in-law, who of course is the Princess of Wales's father, was given 50 tickets. He thought he was going to have 500, and he had an enormous list ready to put in his friends and everybody who mattered. So he said to me, I can only, out of 50 tickets, because I've got so many relations, give you 2, which was for myself and my unmarried son. Well, I thought it over, and I was 80, and I thought, well, it's much more important for my other son to go, who's got 2 small children who want to hear about it. So I gave my seat to my eldest son, so my two sons went together.
The Royal Romance, of course, was almost like the plot of one of your books.
Well, exactly, because, you see, what the Princess of Wales have done is brought in a new type of heroine, which is absolutely fantastic. I was saying to her the other day, she has altered the whole idea. It's femininity, which we haven't had for years. We've had nothing but these hard-voiced pseudo-men. And suddenly this one quiet little girl comes along and has swept the world. I mean, there's no doubt about it. America, as you know, are mad about her. France is absolutely crazy about her, and so is England. And when they want to sell a magazine, they've all told me the same. They put her on the cover and it sells double what you would sell otherwise.
Do you think she's changed much since becoming a princess?
I don't think she has. I think she seems exactly the same. And my daughter, who's her stepmother, thinks exactly the same. I think she's improved, I think, because I think she's getting older. But I mean, I don't think she's changed particularly. She's still just as sweet and just as interested in other people and kind and understanding as she was before. And she's proved herself over and over again as exactly the right person for him. And Lord Mountbatten adored the Prince of Wales and always said he was an exceptional young man who would make a very great king. And we were all frightened that he would marry somebody who wouldn't really help him and be the right person for him. And I think he's been so lucky in finding exactly the right person.
Now, Lord Mountbatten, I believe, collaborated with you on writing several books. How did that come about?
Well, a long time ago, they asked me if I'd write the whole of the history of the St. John Ambulance Brigade. And I said, really, I hadn't got time. But I said, what I will do is write you a novel, which I did, called The Dream and the Glory, which was all about the time when Napoleon took Malta on his way to Egypt. And I said to Lord Mountbatten, who was a very great friend, had been a great friend of mine for 50 years when he was assassinated, I said, I can't do this rigging of the Napoleonic ships, you must do it for me. So he said, all right. So he did the rigging. Then we wrote a book called Useless Information, which was sold for his United World Colleges, which was a thing that was very close to his heart. And so we did that book. And then he realized, because he was very sharp, that I made more money out of my novels than anything else. And he said, I want a novel. I said, well, that's quite easy. I said, you will write the naval part, and I will write the love part, and we'll do one together.
When you were 77 years old, you sang an album of love songs with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. How did you happen to do that?
The Royal Philharmonic Orchestra came to see me, and they said, we're starting now, we think, the Romantic era, which was quite true. And we want to play a lot of love songs. Will you tell us what we ought to play? So I said, all right, I'll give you a list. I went away to Guadeloupe. I was motoring in Guadeloupe in the Caribbean with my son. I said to him, do you think I could sing with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra? And he said, Mummy, I think you're mad. Anyhow, I came back to England, and I asked Norman Newell, who is very important in the world of making records, come and see me. And I said, I haven't sung for 40 years. Do you think I could sing? And he said, well, you've got a very good talking voice. I'm sure you could make one. I thought, well, I'll sing, just to show. And out came what Jean Rook said was a little haunting voice, which she found very, very, very intriguing.
If you were the only girl in the world,
And you were the only boy, nothing else would matter in the world today. We could go on loving in this way.
A garden of Eden, just made for two, with nothing to mar our joy. I would say such wonderful things to you.
there would be such wonderful things to do if you were the only girl in the world.
And you were the only boy.
It's well known that one of your greatest interests is in natural foods and health products. What is your best recommendation for staying young?
Well, we've got such wonderful new things now. Really very, very exciting. One of the things which you can hardly believe is true, but the Americans in Texas have found something called superoxide dismutase. which is sold as SOD, which is much easier to pronounce, which recreates the cells in our bodies as they die and recreates new ones. Well, all the scientists who've worked on it, mostly in America at the moment, are so impressed by it because it makes you young. They say they've experimented with 1,000 women, and every one of them, after taking SOD for some weeks, looked 20 years younger.
You've traveled a great deal. What is your favorite place that you visited?
India. I adore India. I feel very happy in India.
And have you used the places you've traveled as local settings for your novels?
Oh, I always do. I always do, yes. I went to Hyderabad the other day, and I came back with what I think is a very good story of India called Love on the Wind. And then I've been to all the other parts of India. I've written 5 books on India.
Who are your favorite writers?
Well, I only read history, you see, and what people don't realize is that I'm used enormously in universities and in schools. So all my history has to be correct. And for every novel I write, I read 20 to 30 history books. So the background is correct. And I take the endless trouble to see that I never make mistakes. I write between about 1790 and 1900, simply because I don't think men in wigs look very attractive. But you see, the sad thing is that, if one's honest, my historical efforts and all the other things I do don't sell half as well as what the Duke said in bed. That's what everybody wants to hear.
You also, of course, write biographies. Your biography of your brother, Ronald Cartland, the Member of Parliament who was killed at Dunkirk, has a preface by Sir Winston Churchill. Did you know him well?
Oh, I knew Winston very well from about 1923, and Winston became a very great friend of my brother's when he went in the house. And during Dunkirk, I don't suppose any man could have been more busy than he was. 3 times he rang up my mother personally to ask if they had any news of my brother.
I know you had the law changed regarding gypsies. How did you get involved in the welfare of gypsies?
Well, my brother, who was the first Member of Parliament that killed in the war, was always furious against injustice, and so am I. The one thing that makes me angry is things that are unjust. And I discovered, really by chance, to do with my work with St. John, that the gypsies were moved every 24 hours. And I was then on education at County Hall, because I was a county councillor for Hertfordshire. And I went to the County Hall and I said, what is done about education for gypsy children? and the man I was asking said to the clerk, that's a hard one, which meant they were doing nothing. And I was appalled because it meant that everybody could have education in this country except gypsies. Well, that's a racial act. You can't have that. You can't say everybody can have democracy except one group of people. So I started a battle, I don't know how hard it was going to be, in which I said I must have camps for gypsies so that the children go to school. In the end, I got a token camp of my own, so I own the only Romany gypsy camp in the world. And they altered the law, and Keith Joseph did it for me when he was Home Secretary, in which he said, every local authority must provide camps for their own gypsies. We've now got 9 or 10 in Hertfordshire. All the children have done very well at school. And when they'd first got in, I was rather nervous, so I rang up all the schoolmasters and said, how are the children doing at school? And they said extremely well. They come to school very, very clean, very tidy, and they look on education as a privilege.
Looking back on your life, what achievement are you most proud of?
I think the achievement, when I rarely finish, I hope I'll be able to say, is I brought the world a certain amount of health and a great deal of love.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Cartland.
Thank you for having me. What I want in my life, and what everyone wants all the world over, is love. But to win love, I have found that one must give love. Love is my reason for living. Love is my reason for giving. Life would be only empty and lonely if it were not for love. Do you remember our meeting
heart beating. Now in your tender arms I surrender, finding my own true love. Your reason for living is
The World of English. Part 1 of an introduction and survey of the English language and its native speakers, in which you will hear examples of practical English in action as the international language of the modern world, plus the history and development of the language from Old English to modern English, with examples of its evolution drawn from its greatest literature through the ages, performed by leading professional actors of the English-speaking theatre, television, and films. Now here is Richard Gale to introduce you to the world of English.
Over 360 million people speak English as their mother tongue. Although English is numerically second to Mandarin Chinese, which can claim some 600 million native speakers, no one would seriously propose learning Chinese as a practical world language. In fact, the Chinese themselves are now busy implementing plans to learn English on a large scale. Not only would Chinese be too difficult, but its 600 million speakers are confined to one relatively small area, whereas English speakers, thanks to the British Empire, are to be found on every continent and in every corner of the globe. To a European, the English-speaking world probably means little beyond the United States of America and England. But when a European says England, he most likely means the United Kingdom, which of course is composed of 4 different English-speaking countries: Wales, Scotland, Ulster, also known as Northern Ireland, and England. With a bit more thought, a European will remember to include Eire, the Republic of Ireland, Australia, Canada, South Africa, and New Zealand, perhaps. But these are only 10 of the 45 countries which consider English their first or official or natural native language. In addition, there are 19 other countries for which English is the practical or educated first language. Countries like Guyana, India, and the Sudan. Most of the important African states are English-speaking by tradition and by choice, using English to unify the country and serve as the principal means of communication between diverse tribes. Kenya, Nigeria, Zambia, Ghana, Malawi, Tanzania. Just a few of the black African countries which depend on English for their law courts and parliaments and day-to-day business dealings. In Asia, the English language serves the same purpose for the entire Indian subcontinent as well as for the smaller outposts of the empire, now the Commonwealth, such as Fiji, Tonga, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia and Ceylon, or rather Sri Lanka as it is now called. The Caribbean Sea is sprinkled with islands in the sun: Bermuda, Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, Dominica, the Bahamas, where English is spoken by everyone, black, white, or brown. English contains many variations of accent and even dialect, but unlike Italian or German, the dialects are rarely different enough to make comprehension impossible. True, a London Cockney would have a very difficult time in a conversation with a steel worker in Glasgow, and a Carolina cotton picker might find it difficult to understand and be understood by a sheep farmer from Australia. But a businessman from, say, Indianapolis, Indiana, USA, would have few problems dealing with a businessman from Dublin, Ireland, or Sydney, Australia, Auckland, New Zealand, Liverpool in England, Johannesburg, South Africa, or Kingston, Jamaica. A reasonably educated standard English allows comprehension and communication all over the English-speaking world. Can you guess where these native English speakers come from?
Big breakfasts have always been something the English-speaking world has had in common. What is known on the continent as an English breakfast. This is also true where I come from. We have bacon and eggs, as well as toast and marmalade, and tea or coffee, and often breakfast cereals like porridge and cornflakes.
On the continent, people are usually more formal, shaking hands a lot and calling each other doctor, engineer, professor and all that. The English-speaking world tends to be more informal. We don't shake hands so much. We don't use academic titles. They're considered pretentious. And we prefer first names, not only for friends and colleagues, but often even the boss is Mike or John, and not Mr. So-and-so.
Where I come from, everybody understands and speak English, but the older people also speak patois. I never learned patois. I grew up only speaking English.
Ever since Lord Sandwich put meat between two pieces of bread so that he could eat while playing cards, the sandwich has been the basic lunch of most English-speaking countries. At least it's certainly true where I come from.
Political and social stability is something you find in nearly all the English-speaking countries. We all share a strong tradition of democratic government and a respect for the law. You don't find dictators, revolutionaries, or many extremists of any kind as a rule. Perhaps that's why there are no English words for fascism, coup d'etat, push, or junta. These are foreign concepts, so we have to use the foreign words.
Voice number 1,
And often breakfast cereals like porridge and cornflakes.
was an English-speaking South African. Voice number 2,
Often even the boss is Mike or John, and not Mr. So-and-so.
was from the Republic of Ireland. Voice number 3
I grew up only speaking English.
was a West Indian from Dominica. Voice number 4
At least it's certainly true where I come from.
was an American from the East Coast of the United States. Voice number 5
These are foreign concepts, so we have to use the foreign words.
was from Australia.
But the geographical spread of the English-speaking world cannot entirely account for English being the lingua franca of the modern world. The industrial and technological achievements, mainly of Britain and the United States, has made English the international language of many different fields, like international air traffic control.
Bahrain Tower, this is Lufthansa 146, clear to descend to 1,500 feet.
This is Bahrain Tower, roger.
Turning into final approach, runway 30.
Wind 320 degrees, 15 knots. You are cleared to land. Runway 30.
Sea navigation. The complex jargon of computers and space technology.
We're standing by for a go for cabin depress, over. Tranquility Base, this is Houston. You are go for cabin depressurization. The hatch is coming open. Okay, Houston, I'm on the porch. Roger, Neil. Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. At the foot of the ladder, I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And international business conferences.
I call on the delegate from Switzerland.
I propose that items 11 and 12 from the agenda be postponed until the afternoon session of the conference.
Is the proposal seconded?
I second the proposal.
The delegate from Italy has seconded the proposal.
Mr. Chairman, I ask to speak.
Yes, Mr. Garcia. Order, please. The delegate from Spain has the floor.
If the agenda is changed, will there be time for the delegate from France to address the meeting?
Monsieur Barrot's address on cash flow has been rescheduled to the Thursday morning session.
Then I agree with Her Majesty's proposal.
Any objections? Then we shall now adjourn for lunch.
One more week of this.
Through the American Negroes, English became the language of jazz. English continues as the language of pop music throughout the world, not only from British and American pop stars, but as the chosen language of the Swedish group ABBA and the Spanish group Baccarat, and no doubt many others in other countries. The British enthusiasm for competitive sport has given the world soccer football, rugby football, golf, tennis, cricket, squash, boxing, competitive swimming, rowing, modern horse racing, and even ping pong. To this list, the Americans have added volleyball, basketball, and baseball. It is hardly surprising that English is the international language of sport, and words like corner, penalty, goal, KO, and smash are familiar in every language. Advertising is another field which is largely dominated by the English language.
In its modern form, advertising was an American invention, and the creative approach to advertising in most developed industrial countries shows the American influence in style and the use of language. Tom Boyd was on the creative side of advertising for many years, with large international agencies like BBDO, where he was creative manager. Tom, what about the use of English in advertising?
The language of advertising is simple and direct, yet it should be colorful and memorable. Advertisers like to use a lot of idioms that are familiar to the majority of the consumers in the chosen target market, plus the use of strongly emotive words. I remember when I began in advertising, I described a certain cake as yellow. My boss quickly told me that the color yellow doesn't exist in advertising. The word, he said, is golden.
During your years in advertising, you wrote a number of press ads and TV and cinema commercials for products as different as Shell petrol and Unilever detergents. As an American, did you have to adjust your approach and use of language for the United Kingdom market?
Absolutely. In the English-speaking world, the language may be more or less the same, but the usage varies from country to country. When the American agencies first came to Britain, they made the great mistake of trying to use the same copy and commercials that they had used successfully in the USA. Well, it simply didn't work. The lifestyle in the UK is different, the temperament is different, and the idiom is different. Of course, the British understood the advertisements, or as the Americans say, advertisements, but they simply didn't respond to them. In some cases, they were offended by them, or simply laughed at them. The U.S. agencies soon realized their mistake and changed the approach to fit the British market. Unfortunately, some European companies are still making that mistake. I noticed not long ago a large Italian company advertising in the English press, the Times I think it was. The ad, or advert as it's sometimes called, had obviously been written by an American copywriter in New York, and no one had bothered to change it. Everything was wrong for the English. The style was too brash for British taste, the vocabulary was wrong, even the spelling was wrong for England. Any company which spends money promoting their products in the English-speaking world ought to be sensitive to their differences, or they may be wasting their money and actually damaging their products.
Can you give us an example of the language of advertising?
Yes, I've picked a jingle I wrote, a jingle being a little song for advertising purposes. This one is for a chocolate bar, what the Americans call a candy bar. Market research told us that people like crunch, that is, something that makes a noise when you bite into it. People look for crunchiness in a good chocolate bar. Nougat or nuts, for example, make it crunchy. So that's why we named the bar King Crunch. Here's the jingle as it was recorded for radio and television.
Have you met my friend, the King Crunch? The nuttiest, the crispiest bar of a bunch. Rich milk chocolate and a whole lot of chew. A king that you can get those pearly teeth into. King Crunch, the royal munch that puts you in the pink when you're blue. So have a little fling with my friend the king. The chocolate with the crunchiest to chew, chew. King Crunch.
You notice how many words imply crunchiness. Crisp, chew, munch, get your teeth into, all to fit the marketing brief. Let's listen to a few lines at a time.
Have you met my friend, the King Crunch? The nuttiest, the crispiest bar of a bunch.
Nuttiest, crispiest, both superlatives, of course, the most usual form of adjective in advertising. Of the bunch. Bunch means a group of things, more commonly associated with a bunch of flowers, a bunch of bananas, and a bunch of grapes. But here it means a bunch of chocolate bars.
Rich milk chocolate and a whole lot of chew. A king that you can get those pearly teeth into.
Pearly teeth, a fairly common and flattering idiom meaning teeth like pearls.
King Crunch, the royal munch that puts you in the pink when you're blue.
The royal munch. Munch means to chew with great activity, and if that's what the consumer likes, we tell him that's what he'll get. Now we come to some literally colorful idioms. Puts you in the pink when you're blue. In English, pink is the color associated with good health, and blue is the color of depression and sadness. So the line is saying that by eating a King Crunch, you'll feel a lot better.
So have a little fling with my friend the king.
Have a little fling. A fling is a spell of indulgence in impulse, according to the dictionary. Could be a love affair. The manufacturer certainly hopes so.
The chocolate with the crunchiest to chew, chew. King Crunch.
It sounds delicious. Where can I buy a King Crunch?
I'm afraid you can't. When it came to the point of production, there were problems with marketing and distribution, and the bar never got produced. Or, as they say in advertising, it never got off the ground. You'd better have a Mars bar instead.
English is also the language of education. Throughout the Third World, most secondary education and virtually all university lectures are in English. Even in Europe, in countries as small as Sweden and as large as Russia, scientists and scholars of all kinds write their most important research and theses in English to guarantee the largest possible audience. And since the formation of the NATO forces, English has also become the language of the Western military establishment, the soldiers of all NATO countries being trained and taught in English. In addition, the English language can claim the most extensive and richest poetical literature of any language in the world.
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance, or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. William Shakespeare.
The Isles of Greece, the Isles of Greece, where burning Sappho loved and sung, where grew the arts of war and peace, where Delos rose and Phoebus sprung. Eternal summer gilds them yet, but all except their sun is set. Lord Byron.
No man is an island entire of itself. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. John Donne.
I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. William Wordsworth.
When I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent which is death to hide lodged with me useless, though my soul more bent to serve there with my Maker and present my true account, lest he returning chide. Doth God exact day labour, light denied, I fondly ask? But patience to prevent that murmur soon replies. God doth not need either man's work nor his own gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. His state is kingly. Thousands at his bidding speed and post o'er land and ocean without rest. They also serve, who only stand and wait. John Milton.
Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of one-night cheap hotels. T.S. Eliot.
My heart is in the Highlands, my heart is not here. My heart is in the Highlands a-chasing the deer, chasing the wild deer and following the roe. My heart is in the Highlands, wherever I go. Robert Burns.
Oh, to be in England now that April's there, and whoever wakes in England sees some morning unaware that the lowest boughs in the brushwood sheaf round the elm tree bole are in tiny leaf, while the chaffinch sings on the orchard bough, in England now. Robert Browning.
English, as a separate identifiable language, is over 1,200 years old. It all began with the invasion of the island of Britain by 3 Germanic tribes from northern Europe, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, in the year 499 AD, Anno Domini. Although the island had been inhabited since prehistoric times, indeed, Stonehenge was built by ancient Britain some 3,500 years ago, the beginning of English dates from this invasion, when the pagan adventurers from Denmark and the lowlands of the continent drove the native Celts and Romans out of what is now England into the mountains and protected regions of Wales and Scotland. From the tribe of Angles comes the name Engleland, land of the Angles. and the name of the language, but it was primarily the dialect of the West Saxons which became the standard speech and developed into Old English. The first written records in English date from 700 AD, and about this time Britain was invaded yet again by Scandinavian adventurers, the Vikings. After some 200 years of fighting with the Anglo-Saxons, the Vikings came to an agreement with the Saxon king, Alfred the Great, to divide the island. The Saxons in the west, the Scandinavians, who were Norse-speaking, in the east. England was therefore bilingual until the two groups, through intermarriage, became one people. The linguistic blend of Saxon and Norse was also a marriage. In the verb to be, for example, the third person singular, he is pure Saxon, but the plural, they are, is pure Norse. The word wife is Saxon, but the word husband came from the Norse. Arm from the Saxon, but leg from the Norse. Duru was a Saxon word for door, but vindu was the Norse word which gave us window. So from this marriage, one language which we call Old English. It was a very complicated language compared to modern English. It was highly inflected, that is, it had many different endings for all words, as in Latin or modern German and Russian. It also gave grammatical gender to nouns, masculine, feminine, and neuter, like modern German. And not only did it have singular and plural, but a third form called the dual form to indicate precisely two, no more and no less. For example, in addition to the pronouns I and we in the first person, Old English had wit, which means the two of us, both of us, you and me, but not them. Many words in Old English are still close enough to modern English for us to understand them. See if you can guess what these Old English words mean.
Thinken, chilled, Wifman, Muth, Nozu, Gott nicht.
Perhaps you could hear that thinken is the verb to think. Chilled in modern English is child. Wifman became woman. Muth, mouth. Nozu, nose. Gott nicht, good night. But most of Old English is unintelligible today without studying it as a separate language. From the 10th century we have a manuscript of what is probably the first considerable poem written in any modern language. It is the epic poem Beowulf, which is over 3,000 lines long. Here are a few lines from it, read in authentic Old English for you to hear what it sounded like.
Beowulf Madaloda, Bjernig Thiawes, Nesoya Snotar Yuma, Selva bit Hachwan net Heihis Cheondreka, Don he fell a moon. Urag will shall ende gebieden, world liefes, work set a motor, domus er death, that bit drith human, unlifiendum after celest.
And this is what these lines mean in modern English.
Beowulf, the son of Ecgtheow, answered, Do not grieve, wise Hrothgar. Better each man should avenge his friend than deeply mourn. The days on earth for every one of us are numbered. He who may should win renown before his death. That is a warrior's best memorial when he has departed from this world.
The next invasion of Britain, and incidentally the last foreign invasion of the island in English history, was in the year 1066. The invading forces were again Scandinavians, but with a difference. These Norsemen, called Normans, came from the north coast of France and were French-speaking. Their leader, William, known as the Conqueror, had a claim on the throne of England, and his forces were victorious. William established himself as king and set about building London's two greatest tourist attractions, the Tower of London and Westminster Abbey. Norman French became the language of the court, the aristocracy of England, and the country once again became bilingual. We often say history repeats itself, and this is just what happened to the language. In the course of 300 years, Old English absorbed Norman French and emerged as one language, much as had happened with Saxon and Norse before. Norman French enriched the language and gave English its unique blend of Germanic and Latinate structures and vocabulary. This is why today we can say the world's population or the population of the world, and why only English has different words to distinguish the names of animals from their flesh which we eat. From the cow we get beef, from the calf we get veal, from the sheep mutton, from the pig pork, and from the deer venison. The names of the animals are Saxon, and the words for the meat are from French. This is not only interesting as a point of language, but as a point of sociology, because it reflects that the animals were raised by farmers who spoke Old English, but eaten by the aristocrats who spoke French. Because England was bilingual, many phrases appeared in the language which contained one word of Saxon origin coupled with a word of the same meaning coming from French, such as law and order. This way everybody knew the meaning, whether they only understood the Old English word law, or they only understood the French ordre, order. Many of these set phrases dating from the Middle Ages are just as common today in modern English. How many politicians in Britain and the USA call for more law and order at election time? In the US Senate, as in the British Parliament, there is a Ways and Means Committee to find the methods of achieving a goal. The word ways from the Saxon, the word means from the French. The phrase, ways and means, still common after some 700 or 800 years in the language. This merger of Saxon and Norman French we call Middle English. The first great English poet, Geoffrey Chaucer, wrote in Middle English in the 14th century, about the same time as Dante Alighieri and Boccaccio. His best-known work, The Canterbury Tales, was written in 1386, and its vocabulary reflects the blend of the two language sources. Here is a bit from the prologue of the Canterbury Tales, read as it was written and pronounced as we assume Middle English sounded.
A good wife was there beside the bather. She was some deal deaf, and that was scather. Of cloth making she had a switch and hunt, she passed hem of Ypres and of Gaunt. In all the parish wife, nay, was there none that to the offering before her should gone, and if there did, certain, so wroth was she that she was out of all the charity.
Could you understand any words or phrases? Probably not. Here's the same passage in modern English.
A worthy woman from beside Bath City was with us, somewhat deaf, which was a pity. In making cloth, she showed so great a bent, she bettered those of Ypres and of Ghent. In all the parish not a dame dared stir towards the altar steps in front of her, and if indeed they did, so wroth was she, as to be quite put out of charity.
In the following century, the printing press arrived in England, and libraries were founded at Oxford, Cambridge, and in London. The first printer, William Caxton, began to stabilize the written language and its spelling when he set up his printing press in the precinct of Westminster Abbey. Even by the 15th century, Old English seemed a foreign language to him, and he commented on how rapidly the language was changing even in his lifetime. Here is what he wrote in 1490.
My Lord Abbot of Westminster did do show me light certain evidences written in Old English for to reduce it into our English now used, and certainly it was written in such ways that it was more like to Dutch than English, he could not reduce, nay, bring it to be understanden. And certainly our language new used varieth fair from that which was used and spoke when he was born.
My Lord Abbot of Westminster has recently shown me certain passages written in Old English to translate into the English now used. Certainly it was written in such a way that it was more like Dutch than English. I could not translate it, nor even understand it, and certainly our language is now very different from that which was used and spoken when I was born.
The Renaissance in 1500 brought about the rediscovery of the classics, and English was greatly enriched by a profusion of words directly taken from Latin and ancient Greek. It has been said that the greater part of the classical dictionaries was poured into the English language at this time. From Latin, words like accommodate, capable, persecute, investigate. And from Greek, words like apology, climax, physical, emphasis, and so on. The flood of words from Latin and Greek did not end with the Renaissance, and whenever we have needed a new word or name, we have tended to look to the classics to provide it. From Greek, aerodrome, telegraph, and telephone. From Latin, escalator, penicillin, and the prefix mini, for cars and skirts, for example. But back to the 16th century now, for what could be one of the greatest influences on the English language, the birth of William Shakespeare in 1564. Appropriately enough, on the 23rd of April, the day dedicated to St. George, patron saint of England. Curiously enough, Shakespeare also died on the 23rd of April, 52 years later. It will forever be a mystery how this man, of modest education and with no intellectual pretensions or literary ambitions beyond providing good entertainment for the common Londoner of the day, became the greatest poet of the English language and the world's most produced playwright. It has been said that in the nearly 400 years since his death, there has never been a day when one or more of Shakespeare's plays have not been played somewhere in the world. But even more important, perhaps, was his contribution to the language. However poorly educated a native English speaker may be, he cannot help using the words and phrases created by Shakespeare. They are too much a part of English. When a Tennessee housewife speaks nostalgically about her salad days, when she was young and beautiful, she probably has no idea that she's quoting from Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. Everyday phrases like blood-stained and fancy-free were creations of Shakespeare, along with such invaluable words as lonely, countless, and dwindle, meaning to decline, to lose importance, to become smaller. Shakespeare gave the language through his inventive genius so many words, phrases, and memorable sayings which simply didn't exist before. Few people of any education in the English-speaking world would not know the line, "The quality of mercy is not strained." Here is Portia, from The Merchant of Venice, putting the famous phrase into context.
The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as a gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His sceptre shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself, and earthly power doth then show likest God's when mercy seasons justice.
And scarcely anyone educated in any language anywhere in the world can fail to know, to be or not to be, that is the question. From Hamlet. Perhaps the line, All the World's a Stage is not so well known in other languages, but the speech it comes from demonstrates Shakespeare's masterly use of Elizabethan English, his vivid poetic images, and his ability to speak in universal truths that make the text as accurately observed today as nearly 400 years ago. Furthermore, foreign students, with a little help of a glossary for a few difficult words, should be able to understand most of the text. Certainly 95% of the words in this passage are still in common use in modern English. Now, from the play As You Like It, written in 1599, The 7 Ages of Man.
All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first the infant, mewling in nurse's arms, then the whining schoolboy, with his satchel and shining morning mail, unwillingly to school, and then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress' eyebrow. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honour, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly, with good capon lined, with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances. And so he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with spectacles on nose and pouch on side, his youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice turning again toward childish treble, pipes and whistles in its sound. Last scene of all that ends this strange eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything.
The question, what's in a name, is another of those Shakespearean quotations that is known to nearly every native English speaker the world over. And millions would also know what follows it. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Listen to these immortal lines spoken softly on that famous balcony in Verona.
See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek.
Ah, me.
She speaks. Oh, speak again, bright angel, for thou art as glorious to this night, being o'er my head, as is a winged messenger of heaven unto the white upturned wondering eyes of mortals that fall back to gaze on him, when he bestrides the lazy pacing clouds, and sails upon the bosom of the air.
Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name, or if thou wilt not be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet.
Shall I hear more, or shall I speak at this?
'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. Romeo, doff thy name, and for that name, which is no part of thee, take all myself.
I take thee at thy word. Call me but love, and I'll be new baptized. Henceforth I never will be Romeo.
The adventures of Dr. Reinhard Grosskopf, the world's greatest expert in goldfish. In this episode, he arrives at passport control at Heathrow Airport in London.
Passport, please. Yes. Wait a minute, please. Oh, dear. I must have had it in Dusseldorf, or I couldn't have got on the plane. Perhaps in your briefcase. Not possible. The briefcase is full of goldfish food. Goldfish food? Yeah. But perhaps here in my duty-free bag. If you hold these little papers, I shall have a look. No, don't bother looking. These little papers are your passport and identification. Oh, I am the silly Billy, as you say in English. Have you come to the United Kingdom on business or pleasure? My business is my pleasure, and my pleasure is my business. And what is your business? I promote the welfare of Carassius auratus. That is what you call in English goldfish, and what we call in German goldfish. We are all bilingual these days. What do you intend to do during your stay here? I sell nutrition and entertainment aids for our little friends in the pond. Nutrition? I represent a company in Germany, Aquapet, which produces the best goldfish food in the world. I see. What exactly did you mean when you said you sell entertainment aids? Life can be very boring if you are living in a bowl. We produce coral reefs, castles, plastic ferns, artificial shells, and so on, to enrich the environment and introduce an element of novelty into their humdrum lives. Ah, you mean you're a salesman? I am a professor of zoology, specializing in ornamental fish. I was on the faculty of one of the greatest German universities before I decided to get into the commercial swim. That is my little joke. Commercial swim? Yes, of course. And how long will you be staying in Britain? Perhaps a week. You haven't come to see a doctor? Oh, no, I am a doctor. Dr. Reinhard Grosskopf. Would you mind having a little word with our resident airport medical officer? Ah, he is interested in goldfish? Well, I think he may be interested in what you've been telling me. This way, please. Professor? I shall bring all my samples. And now, Armchair Detective, where you try to solve the mysteries and murders in the small English village of Abington Frith. Can you solve this latest crime?
Not a pretty sight. Reverend Horatio Green, in his youth, was something of a sissy. He was neat and tidy, dressed in coordinating clothes, ate up all his food without leaving any crumbs, read the Bible for fun, and paid careful attention to everything his mother said. Consequently, when she advised him to marry Vanessa Simpkins, the elder daughter of her oldest friend, he said yes, without any hesitation. Vanessa and Horatio were the subjects of a lively debate among their friends and acquaintances. There were those who said that, while Horatio had some good points, the best of them was Vanessa. Others defended Horatio and said that although he had always liked stupid women, he had gone too far with Vanessa. As for those who liked both Horatio and Vanessa, there were none. Regardless of which side of the controversy you might like to take, it ended as a practical matter at about 2:45 p.m. on a lovely July afternoon, according to Constable Dinwiddie's account. Horatio had gone out in his punt on the lake and returned at about 4 p.m. to find Vanessa dead and the constable waiting for him. His shock was about what one might expect, and in answering the questions Dinwiddie put to him, he made the following statements. Which of them do you think are true, false, or impossible to prove?
We hope you have enjoyed the first Speak Up cassette and have furthered your knowledge and understanding of English. The next cassette contains part 2 of The World of English, plus an exclusive interview with the controversial British politician Enoch Powell. Listen to it with the next issue of Speak Up.
Speak up in English wherever you are. The whole world, the whole world, the whole world can speak up to you. Speak up, speak up, speak up.